I am indeed thrilled to be here. It's been a while since I have been with this community, spoken with this community, connected with this community, spent some time with this community. I don't know if you guys remember way back in the day, for a short-lived period of time, I was the choir director for all of 5 minutes. I don't know if you remember that, but it was a memorable moment indeed, and it was just a moment. But we had a good time while it was happening. So I do have great connection to this community. I'm glad to be here, and yes, today I'm talking around a topic that is usually something that's heavy, that's but in so many ways, it's something each and every one of us can relate to. Why is that? Because we've all had losses in our life. Each and every one of us. If you haven't lost anything, you haven't been alive. So it's a thing we can all relate to on some level. Yet I find we don't necessarily talk about it a lot, and talk with each other about it a lot necessarily. And also, I've learned over my journey that grief itself is a spiritual practice, not something to be avoided or shirked off. But before I get into all of that, let me tell you a little bit about my grief journey, which started almost 6 years ago, and many of you might be aware of it, with the passing of my wife, Reverend Jennifer Holder. Many of you may have known her personally, and if you knew her personally, you loved her. If you loved her like me, you still miss her. And she drew her last breath on Unity grounds, June of 2015, after a battle with cancer. And it was not perhaps, to this day, it still remains perhaps the most challenging period of time for both myself and my daughter, who was just 14 years old at the time. And as I'm going through my journey of trying to, accept, understand, navigate this grief journey, a few months afterwards, an aunt of mine passes away. And this was an aunt that I was very close with. Growing up, I would, as a child in Barbados, I would spend summers in New York and stay with her and my uncle in Brooklyn. And even years later, coincidentally, even though we know there are no coincidences, when I went to college in Virginia, they were living there, and I lived with them for 2 years as well. So she was, I loved her humor and her compassion, and she was a very influential figure in my life. And less than a year after Jennifer's passing, she passed away as well. Then a few months later, another fixture in my life passed away, my grandfather, back in Barbados. And he was one of these, like, tough love, right? Sort of gruff, came across as like impatient, but he just had the biggest heart in the world. He was the choir director of the little church him and my grandmother went to. And one of my earliest memories was of me sitting in his lap in the truck and him letting me steer it. And listen, this wasn't pretend steering. The truck was actually moving, right? And there were then actually also people sitting in the open cab of the truck coming home from church. So I don't know that allowing me to endanger the lives of other people was the best choice on my grandfather's part, but it was a hell of a lot of fun. So then he passed away. And then a few months after that, my grandmother passed away. And my grandmother, she helped raise me. I remember growing up and weekends, my parents were opening their mom and pop shop, which still exists to this day in Barbados. And on weekends, I'd go live at my grandmother's, and I had a cousin who was the same age as mine, and we grew up together. And one of my favorite memories of my grandmother is at their little church. And when I say little, I doubt that building could have held 50 people. It would be communion time, and my grandmother had a bakery. It's still probably one of the most favorite bakeries in the island. And for their communion, she would donate these loaves of like coconut bread. Okay, now you have to understand that she was my grandmother. I was there all weekend. I had access to this bread all during the week, right? But when it was communion and that tray was passing and people were, those who were at the time baptized were the only ones who were allowed to take communion, she would take a piece for herself and then break me off a little bit and sneak it to me. Because I was a little child, I wasn't baptized yet. Baptism was in our tradition back then was was a choice you made of your own free will when you're a little bit older. So she would sneak me this little piece of bread, and it's the same bread I've been eating all week. But for some reason, when she's sneaking it to me, and it was forbidden, oh my God, it tasted so much better, right? So that was still one of my favorite memories of my grandmother. So these deaths came like in this quick succession. In fact, my daughter and I had this like running dark joke, which was like, all right, who's going to die this year? Right. So we were just overwhelmed with this. And we got a little bit of respite from the second half of 2018 into 2019, and then 2020 hit. And we all know what happened in 2020. We had this pandemic race around the world that has taken the lives of so many. I don't know that there's anyone who hasn't either been personally affected by a death in their family or know someone who has been or was at death's door. Our individual and collective lives were forever changed by this pandemic. And in the midst of the pandemic really rearing up to go, I had another profound loss. One of my childhood friends, someone who, sometimes you have those friends who maybe life has pulled you apart. You don't talk for a few months and then you get on the phone and all of a sudden it's like you picked up exactly where the last conversation left off. And then you talk for a few days, you're laughing, and then you don't hear each other for a few months. And then that same thing happened. This has been the journey of our life since we left Barbados as, late teens, early 20s. We've always been that safe space for each other beyond families and spouses and partners. And she had a seizure and she was suddenly diagnosed with a brain tumor. And within, I kid you not, weeks, she was gone. And it was devastating. And the pain of that loss was really the pain of all my previous losses compounded on each other. And one of the things that became really apparent to me during this entire 6-year span was understanding that I was initially trying to use my spiritual teachings to make the grief better. I was affirming love and life. I was affirming the joy in the of Jennifer's life and the presence she was in mine. Whenever I had this upswell of grief, I would try to meditate and open my heart and allow the memories of the happy memories to come up and acknowledge her. I was doing all that spiritual stuff. It didn't help one little bit. I'll be honest with you. In fact, there was a period of time I could not get through more than 2-3 minutes of meditation. And I realized that these spiritual tools that we have, as much as they serve us, sometimes we try to use them to escape the reality of our inner experience. And what I had to realize, and I learned the hard way, was that no, the grief was not something to be avoided. The grief was something to be embraced. The grief was to be something to accept, because here's the thing about us human beings: we don't like to hurt. We don't like to be in pain. We are pain avoidant, pain allergic, and we will do anything to feel better, right? And part of that is because we've labeled pain as wrong. Pain hurts, so pain is wrong. Pain is just pain. Pain is what it is. But if we change the meaning of it from wrong to pain is an invitation to uncover truly the wounded parts of ourselves, then all of a sudden, pain's not wrong. Pain's a good thing. Let me say that again. Pain is an invitation for us to uncover and then begin to heal the wounded parts of ourselves. Because that's what pain is. Pain is actually, when you think about it, pain is what we feel when we are afraid. And fear is really the anticipation of something in the future going wrong. So a lot of the pain was, yes, the pain of the absence and the loss, but a lot of my pain was, what is my future going to be without these people in my lives? And then also the pain was the anticipation of my own death. And that's just something a lot of us maybe don't look at, talk about, embrace until we're much later on in life. And we use our teachings a lot to bypass these things and not put them head on. We want to avoid, we want to move on quickly. But the truth is, any part of ourselves that we reject, even the wounded, hurt part of ourselves, any part of ourselves that we reject is supporting this narrative of our unworthiness. Any parts of ourselves that we reject is supporting a narrative of unworthiness, because we're saying there's a part of us that we don't like, that we don't want to have to deal with, that we don't want to have to embrace, we don't want to have to accept. We can't step into full worthiness and wholeness without fully accepting every part of our inner experience. To be clear, when I say accepting every part of our inner experience, I'm not talking about saying that the things that happen outside of us are okay. We judge, we put the meanings to those things. What I'm saying is, when things happen in our life, the things that we don't plan, the things we don't see coming, and we have responses inside of us, those responses that, again, help us identify those wounded parts of ourselves, those previous original wounds going all the way back to our childhood, that we're still working on healing or have been perhaps ignoring the healing of, then it's reminding us to go there, that we still have work to do. Because it's only when we can accept and love and heal the wounded parts of ourselves and fully embrace the wholeness of who we are that we truly have the experience of the divine within. Because if our essence is divinity and we're rejecting part of who we are, we're in essence rejecting divinity, or trying to, right? And isn't that the cardinal sin in unity? Attempting to reject the divine of who we are? There isn't any part of us that isn't divine, even the wounded parts of ourselves. So we got to do the work to heal the wounded parts, which means first we got to identify them, and then we have to forgive them. And when I say forgive, Erin mentioned about forgiveness before. When I talk about forgiveness now, I talk about simply unconditionally loving the wounded parts of ourselves. It's got nothing to do with who did what, when to where. It's about realizing there's a part of me that is wounded. It hurts, and things trigger it to make it hurt some more. And the only way that I'm going to find some peace and some resolution around those wounded parts of myself is to love them. Our co-founder, Charles Irwin, taught us love is the great harmonizer, the connector, the bringing together. And what is a wound other than something that's been ruptured? So we got to bring it together. Got to bring it into harmony. We got to be in harmony with ourselves. We got to love ourselves. So grief, then, when we feel the pangs of grief, right? Part of that is we miss the person that was gone, that's gone from our lives. So there was a level of attachment there that we got to take a look at. How do we love without attachment? How do we love without enmeshment? Right? So there's that element of it. And then it invites us to, again, look at our own mortality. Have we made peace with our own impending deaths? Right? We think of death as this abstract thing that's going to happen down the line. Those of us who are more mature in years, we might be getting closer to it. And now it's something that's a little more mindful for us, right? But the truth of the matter is, death could be a minute, an hour, a week, a month away. Jennifer died. She was 42 years old. 42. We don't know. So imagine if it was tomorrow. Are you at peace with your own mortality? And the invitation is, in order to do that, look and see what frightens that. What frightens you about dying? And look at those places and simply love them. Don't judge them. Don't make yourself wrong. Simply realize whether it's attachment, whether it's the fear of what might happen after you die, the fear of the unknown, right? Because, many of us, we didn't grow up in unity. We're not unicorns. We did not grow up in unity. We grew up in other traditions that told us some weird, batshit crazy stuff that might be happening after we die. And even though we may not cognitively believe that anymore, it's still embedded in us. It's still embedded in us. And every once in a while, it might thrum the strings of our memory, and we're like, is that still, it's still, and that's because we moved on from it without resolving it, without healing it, without deconstructing it, without looking at it and saying, you know what? It's more than me not just believing this anymore. It's me loving the part of me that did, the part of me that's afraid, and finding some peace and resolution with it. And this is not just about our personal grief. This is about our collective grief. We are all collectively grieving under the weight of the lives lost in this pandemic, whether we knew people personally, just hearing about those numbers and knowing that because we are all energetically connected with them, we are feeling the trauma of that loss. And, we are, states are reopening, churches are reopening, and everybody's like, yes, the vaccines are working. We can get back to life. We can get back to doing new things. And we're all excited and we're all ready to go forward. And we haven't taken the time to pause and go, what about this collective grief we've been carrying for over a year now? Because if there's one thing I've learned the hard way about grief, if we don't embrace it intentionally, trust me, we're going to have to deal with it unconsciously. And it's going to come up in ways that the people around us are not going to like, and that we're not going to like either. Hurting people hurt people. Let me say that again. Hurting people hurt people. And I can tell you, when I was hurting from the intensity of grief, I said some things that hurt other people. And it took me a while to really, really invite myself into loving myself and the journey of that. And let me share with you another collective trauma that we've been carrying around longer than the pandemic. We've been carrying this around as a nation for centuries, and it's affecting all of us. I don't want to make anybody uncomfortable. Well, actually, yes, I do, because I'm a minister who operates by the mantra, comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. So here we go. We're gonna get a little uncomfortable now, because this trauma that we've also as a nation been carrying around for centuries is systemic racism. It is embodied in the every fiber of how this nation's operated for the last 400 years. And it's a trauma that's affected every single person, whether you are Black, whether you are white, whether you're Asian, whether you're Hispanic, no matter. If you've been living in this country, you've been part of that collective trauma as well. And it is infused in our minds, in our emotions, and in our bodies. Let me say that again. In our minds, in our emotions, in our bodies. It is like a, remember, there's that thing about the fish in water. The fish doesn't know it's swimming in water, right? This is us walking through this world with the energy of this. And we don't even know. It's the air we breathe. It's the water we drink. We're in it. We don't even consciously, actively know it. But when we really, 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 as a nation and as a world, for whatever reason, even though there were many deaths before, even though there were many videos before, last summer, in the midst of the pandemic, when George Floyd was murdered, we saw that video. We saw for almost 9 minutes, originally it was 8 minutes, 46 seconds, and then we realized it was longer. We saw the collective energy of this scourge, systemic racism, boiled down into the actions of one person against another. And we were all shook. And we realized this is not a thing we can avoid anymore, but it was still this, we suddenly become aware of this collective grief and energy that would be weighing down on us. And for a lot of us, like we do when we're in the midst of grief, we freeze. We don't know what to do. We're helpless. We're paralyzed. It's too heavy. It's too much. It's too big. I can't deal with it. And eventually some of us do the work. We become educated and we step into action. A lot of us sometimes use our spiritual teachings to bypass and avoid, but some of us use these spiritual teachings to become empowered. But there's another facet of it that many of us don't step into because we don't know we have to, and that's the physical aspect of it. We hold grief and emotions in our bodies, in the very cells of our bodies. My favorite moment of releasing grief energy is when I was at the gym and I was weightlifting. Right? So I'm at Planet Fitness and I'm pushing the heavy iron, and all of a sudden there is this emotional like breakthrough, and I start bawling. And if you have never seen anyone just violently weeping in the middle of a Planet Fitness gym, I can tell you all sorts of strange looks I'm getting. Because people are like, wait, did he injure himself? Is something wrong? So people are like just walking around me, not knowing what to do. And I am just like weeping. And I don't mean like there's a couple of tears. I am like violently racking in sobs because I needed that emotional push, that exertion, because we hold it in the cells of our bodies. We cannot heal from grief and trauma if we only look at the mental, or if we only look at the emotional, or if we even look at the spiritual. We've got to bring the body practice into it as well. And there are many ways we can do this. Okay, we can. I don't know if you love to dance, but go dance it out. Bring it to mind and dance it out. I want to give you an invitation, actually, not to dance. I'm not going to give you an invitation to dance. Trust me. I do a lot of things while dancing is not one of them. Remember how many of y'all watch Seinfeld? Remember Elaine dancing on Seinfeld? Yeah, there are a couple of stereotypes that I don't live up to. Dancing is one of them. But in a few weeks, recently, me and Reverend Kelly Isla, who some of you might know, we launched a new platform called Project Sanctus. And one of the elements of this is we started a book club. It's called the 846 Book Club in honor of George Floyd. That was the original time that we thought that his neck was under the knee, and it became a rallying cry. There were sit-ins, there were lions and protests afterwards. So we named our book club in the honor of that time, the 846 Book Club. And we're about to start a new book study. We've covered, I think, like 3 books before. It's a book called My Grandmother's Hands. It's a powerful book. The author, his name is Resmaa Menakem, and he's been a psychologist. He's been an embodied practitioner for years and years. And he invites us, both 3 main groups of people, Black folk, white folk, and law enforcement, into this idea of embodied practices to heal the trauma of racism that is in our bodies. Because if we don't heal it in our bodies, guess what? We're passing it on to the next generation. Because I don't know if you know this, the trauma is passed on at the cellular level, right? Oh, look, somebody just put that in the chat. Trauma can literally affect our DNA. Shout out to you, Heather. We on the same wavelength. But that's what happens. Generations. And he writes this thing in this amazing in this book, which sort of blew my mind. He reminded us that when white people came over from Europe in the 15 and 1600s, guess what? They were bringing the trauma that they experienced back in Europe, because they were running from their violent traumas as well. And they brought that trauma over. They didn't heal it because they probably didn't know how to, and pass it on to folks that they were enslaved. And now we're all keep passing on this trauma of systemic racism because we haven't learned how to heal it at the body level. And now we have this great book, this great text. Reverend Kelly has actually been studying with him intensely for the last 9 months. So she's going to be bringing some of that firsthand information. So if you are interested, I really want you to join me in this. I'm going to put the link up in the chat, and I'm sure Reverend Erin will also share it later on the webpage and stuff. But join us in this, because here's the thing. The practices you learn in that are also practices that you can take into your own personal life for your own personal grieving practices, for your own losses, for the collective weight of the loss we've been feeling from this pandemic. We are here to heal the world, but we can't heal the world until we heal ourselves. Because, not to get corny from the 80s songs, but we are the world. Each and every one of us, we are the world. So let's stop asking how we can heal the world and get about the business of healing ourselves, because when we heal ourselves, that's how we heal the world, each and every one of us. And we invite others into it as well through our actions and through our words and our thoughts. So join me for this book study. It's going to be starting on Tuesday nights, June 8th, 6:30 Central on Zoom. All the information will be out later. And thank you to Erin for inviting me here to come and share with you, to speak with you. This place, Unity Village, especially the chapel, will always hold a special place in my heart. And I'm honored to be on this journey of healing and becoming whole with you. Namaste.